So, let me welcome you all to this session on feedback and reflection. I am Shripad Karmalkar. I am a professor of electrical engineering, but I have wider interests in pedagogy, teacher training and so on, and I like to share my experiences of about 20 years of teaching and help other teachers teach in a better way. I happen to be also a member of the Teaching Learning Center executive team. So, we have a teaching learning center at IIT Madras, which is very active and conducts regular programs on teacher training and better teaching and learning and so on. Now, let me tell you what are we going to achieve out of this session. At the end of this session, you will be able to recognize that teachers indeed play an important role. Then you will be able to recognize the need for feedback and reflection to improve teaching. Finally, you will be able to describe how to reflect on our teaching by collecting feedback in different ways. So, the entire goal of this feedback and reflection is to improve our teaching. Let me start by discussing, do I make a difference as a teacher? One of the policies, national policies on education in India, the policy document wrote this on the very first page. So, this quotation is on the screen: "No nation can rise above the level of its teachers." Now, that is a rather strong statement. It tells us that teachers play such an important role in molding persons for development of the country. Let us look at this statement more scientifically. Suppose we take some numbers. I am a teacher. On average, I come across about 50 students in a semester. So, in a year, I come across 100 students. Over a 20-year span, I would have come across about 2000 students. Assuming that each course is about 40 lectures or 40 hours, right, of interaction, I am spending 40 hours with 2000 students. Now, in 40 hours, I can make a tremendous impact on an individual with whom I am interacting. So, as a teacher, I get to make impact on 2000 such people, and therefore, I think it should not be very difficult for us to appreciate that we indeed make an impact on people, right, on students whom we come across. Now, we make an impact. This does not necessarily mean always make a good impact. We may not make a good impact, and we make a bad impact if our teaching is not inspiring. Therefore, it is very important for us as teachers to know that we are impacting the lives of students, either for worse or for better. Therefore, I must learn the methodology to teach in a good manner. Okay? Our students imbibe to an extent our attitudes and skills. Whenever we complain about our students, sometimes we must introspect and see whether how far the attitudes of students and skills, the attitudes and skills of students, our students, is because of us. Is it that our attitudes and skills are rubbing off on them? I am not saying that the attitudes and skills of students are entirely governed by the teacher. All I am saying is that teachers play an important role. Now, that is our next topic. How do I make a difference as a teacher? Because just now we said that teachers alone do not make an impact. Teachers do make an impact, but teachers alone do not make an impact. So, what are all the factors which decide the learning in a student? Now, here is a piece of research, the conclusions from research. What this conclusion says is that broadly there are 4 factors affecting student learning. These are genes, teacher quality, classmates and resources. I am going to include the family environment of the student, okay, the early years, the grooming of the student in early years and so on in this factor called genes. Loosely I am going to include that factor in genes. So, you can see that teachers alone do not make an impact. Other than teacher quality, there are 3 other things: genes, classmates and resources. Now, let us compare, for example, the relative role of genes and teacher quality. Genes might set the bar for learning potential. Teachers play a leading role in helping kids reach it. Now, this is the important point: relative role of genes and teacher quality. For example, suppose I take myself, my height is 5 feet 3.5 inches. Now, could I have done something during my early days to increase this height to say 6 feet? No, because while I can tune my height a little bit, right, but the height that I can achieve is set by my genes. So, this is what I mean by saying that genes set the height. It is, however, important to distinguish between physical height and psychological height. Fortunately, about psychological matters we cannot be so certain as in the case of physical matters like height, and therefore, we should not jump to a conclusion that somebody is dumb due to genes or somebody is very highly intelligent because of genes. That is not what we are saying. What we are implying is that genes do set a limit on learning, ultimate learning that a person can achieve. However, whether the person will achieve that learning depends on the teacher quality. So, this is very important, and this we should be able to appreciate as teachers. Here is another conclusion from research: when teacher quality is low, genetic variance is constricted. When teacher quality is high, genetic variance blooms. What does it mean? It means the following: if I have a large class, and if a large class is taught by a teacher and teacher quality is low, all the students will not perform well. Okay, the class average in some quiz and so on will be low. What will happen if the teacher quality is high? They are taught by a very good teacher. Then what you will see is that you will get a nice distribution of the performance, which means there will be at least some students who will achieve very high performance. No doubt there will be some students who may not be able to perform well even if the teacher is good. That is because, as we are saying, genetics do play a role in the ultimate learning students can have. But the point is that you are now going to get a nice distribution. There will be some people who will be performing very well, and there will be a large number of people who will perform reasonably well under a good teacher, whereas under a bad teacher all the students' performance will be lowered. So, this is how teachers make a difference. So, as a teacher I am helping my students achieve their height potential, right. So, I am playing a great role. Thus, a teacher should be convinced that he or she plays an important role in the development of the student. Now, since as a teacher I am now convinced that I play an important role, the next question is, how can I improve continuously? That is essentially the purpose of this session on feedback and reflection. Now, here is a plan for continuous improvement. So, what you find here is a wheel, and there are 4 parts of the wheel which are named as A, P, R and F. These letters stand for the words which are shown there under the wedge. So, A stands for action, F stands for feedback, R stands for reflection, and P stands for planning. So, all the action that a teacher does inside the class and outside the class is clubbed in this word called action. This includes delivering the lecture in the class, this includes preparing assignments and quizzes outside the class hours, this includes preparing for the course outside the class hours. So, all this inside and outside the class, what all the teacher does is clubbed into this word called action. Now, then comes feedback on your action, whether the action has had the required impact, and then if the feedback shows that your action did not have the intended impact, then I must reflect, I must think about it, why it did not have an impact, and then based on my thinking I come up with an improved plan. So, that is the planning, and then I put the plan into action, and then this cycle of action, feedback, reflection and planning goes on cyclically, and that is shown here as a wheel rotating. So, as the wheel rotates, you can see that it moves up the quality wedge, which means the quality of teaching goes on improving continuously. So, this is how I can improve. Now, let us focus on feedback and reflection. What is reflection? As you know, teachers should define each word, each important word or concept that the teacher uses for the benefit of students, so that there are no misconceptions or misunderstanding. I will introduce this topic of reflection with a couplet from a poet. Now, this couplet is in Hindi, so I will first show you the couplet in Hindi and then give its translation in English. The couplet is by a famous poet Mirza Ghalib. It says in Hindi, हम उम्र भर एक खता करते रहे, धूल चेहरे पर थी, आईना साफ करते रहे. In English, this means the poet is saying, I committed a mistake all through my life. The dust was on my face, yet I kept wiping the mirror. Now, this is the human experience, that during reflection we realize that we were attributing many problems to the wrong causes, and it is only during reflection that we get enlightenment, that what was the real cause, what was the accurate cause, what was the accurate explanation for some happening, and often we misattribute the happenings to wrong causes, right. So, correct attribution is very important, because unless I realize what is the cause of a problem correctly, I will not be able to solve the problem. So, now this applies to our teaching also. Many times what happens is, we say that students are not learning because they are like this, their attitudes are not good, students are not learning because of this reason, that reason, and so on. And very rarely we try to see whether we as teachers are the reason for the student not learning well. So, in other words, we can very simply say reflection is about identifying where is the dust and how to remove it. Okay? So, we identify the correct cause of the lack of learning in students, and then we try to improve matters so that the learning improves. Reflection can be looked at yet another way. Now, here is an excerpt from a teaching statement of a faculty member. What he says is interesting. He says that during early semesters, my performance, that is student feedback, was not good. I had a mindset that the students were not interested in learning. Actually, the issue was not with students. I did self-assessment and realized that the issue was with me. The students were not excited by my teaching. Mainly, it was connected with my delivery method. So, you can see how a particular teacher has come to realize that the problem was with him and not with the students. So, in another way we can say reflection is about self-assessment. So, reflection is identifying where is the dust and how to remove it, or it is about self-assessment. Now, usually when I conduct this session in front of a live audience, I have an interaction. Here I am going to skip this interaction. However, the content of this interaction is important. This interaction is about the following. So, the audience is told that consider changes that you have made in teaching a course. Select a particularly significant change. What was the change? What was your basis for making the change? And how did you evaluate the influences of the change? So, the people from the audience are encouraged to answer these questions, okay? And this ensures a lively interaction. Now, this is essentially what happens in reflection, okay? So, whenever a teacher is making a change, teacher should be very clear as to why he or she is making the change, and then we should also try to evaluate the influence of the change. We cannot just assume without an evaluation that yes, my change has had a good impact, okay? Many times what happens is that we make a change and we assume that because we have made a change, things have improved, right? In fact, we can see that there are a lot of examples where the change made does not achieve the intention. So, I encourage the audience also to give examples where your intent was not achieved. It is very important to learn from failures. Not only successes, but failures are also important. We learn a lot from them. So, let us continue with the discussion on reflection. Our words and actions may not have the intended effect on students. At times, the effect can be opposite to what we intended. This is the experience of all teachers. Now, why does this happen? Often, our awareness of both our teaching and its effects is only partial. It is this partial awareness of our actions that is responsible for many times our actions not achieving the intended purpose. Now, because this awareness is partial, okay, that is when I am doing the action, I am not totally aware of its consequences. Therefore, reflection is a mental process which expands this awareness so as to improve our teaching. So, we must do something after the action is completed to expand our awareness about the impact that my action has had, and that something that you do after the action is called the reflection. That mental process which expands the awareness is called reflection. Now, let us spend a few minutes on feedback. Feedback from students and colleagues enables us to see our teaching through others' eyes and is a valuable input for reflection. So, now the question is, what do I reflect on? So, I should reflect on the feedback about my action. Now, this is very important. In order that my reflection be fruitful, I should have proper inputs into reflection. Therefore, it is very important to learn how to collect feedback on our actions, okay? That will give me an accurate picture of the impact that my action has had. So, this feedback should be taken from both students as well as colleagues or experts. I will discuss why colleagues or experts are also required apart from students, right, to give you an accurate picture of what impact your action has had and how you can improve. It is important to see our teaching through others' eyes and seek feedback in diverse ways, else I may teach others the way I like to be taught and thereby disregard learner diversity. So, this is very important point. If we do not have a feedback from all the students, then often what we do is we have some role models and we try to follow them. Now, what happens is that I have a role model, some teacher as a role model. Supposing I have liked his teaching. Now, it can happen that that method of teaching may not appeal to many others, because everyone does not learn in the same way. Now, this is a very important point. There is what is called learner diversity. People learn in diverse ways. Therefore, I should not use myself as a representative of all my students. Okay, my learning style may not be the same as the learning styles of my students, many of my students. Therefore, I must collect feedback from all of them rather than thinking that everybody is like me. This is a very important mistake that we commit. Okay. Let me give you examples of different learning styles. So, there are some students who can get motivated into learning a topic only if you give a broader overview to start with, which explains how does the topic fit into the big picture. On the other hand, there are other students who get rather confused when you present the big picture. Okay? They like to start with small things and then build up the big picture gradually. Okay? So, in other words, some like to go from general to particular. On the other hand, some learn better if you go from particular to general. So, these are now two different learning styles. Similarly, there are many students who learn from diagrams better than through equations. On the other hand, there are students who learn better through equations rather than diagrams. Therefore, I must collect feedback from all my students in order to be a good teacher who takes care of the learning of all the students. Now, how to reflect? What are the inputs for reflection? Timely feedback from students and colleagues, that is one of the inputs. The other input is some guiding questions and thoughts. These guiding questions and thoughts can be regarded as some sort of mantras for meditation, right. So, all of those who are familiar with the concept of meditation and so on know that to get into this state, some prescriptions are given. For example, you must repeat some sound or some word. Okay. So, this repetition of sound or word helps you to get into the meditative state. Similarly, there are some guiding questions and thoughts for a teacher to get into the state of reflection and try to assess the impact of the teaching, right, during reflection. Finally, research and other literature on teaching learning. So, this is yet another input into reflection. Now, let us look at each of these one by one. So, what are the various forms of feedback? Here is a very simple but effective approach to assess how the teaching and learning is happening in a class. Here what we are doing is we are plotting the various activities that go on in a classroom as a function of time. Now, it is very important to note how the activities are arranged on the y axis. So, whichever activity is most common, that is located closer to the timeline. For example, teacher talking and teacher using chalkboard. Now, these are most common activities that go on in a class, therefore, they are located close to the timeline. All the actions of teachers and students are listed in the positive y axis as you go up, and all the teaching aids that the teacher uses like the chalkboard, projection, multimedia and all that will be listed in the downward direction from the timeline. Now, whichever activity is less common is located farther away from the timeline on this graph. For example, you can see that teacher questioning is less common than teacher talking. Therefore, teacher questioning is located farther away, right. Now, student actions are less common than teacher actions. For example, the number of times students ask questions in the class is much smaller than the number of times the teacher may be asking questions, okay, or the teacher may be talking. Therefore, student question is located much farther away than, let us say, teacher question. Now, student action means a student coming to the board and explaining a derivation or carrying out a derivation. So, all these things are listed as student action here. So, the activities that go on in a class are listed here. Let me go through them once more. Teacher talking, teacher responding to the students, teacher asking question to the students, student responding to the teacher or teacher's question, students asking question, and finally students doing some action, coming to the board and working out things and so on. Now let us also list the teaching aids that are used in the class. So these are listed in the downward direction. Again, whichever is less commonly used in the class, that is listed further down. So teacher using charts and projections is less common than teacher using chalkboard. Therefore using projections is listed further down than chalkboard. And finally multimedia, audio visual aids are used least commonly, and therefore they are listed at the bottom. Now all that I do is plot a graph of these activities. A graph may look something like this. Now what is happening here is that let me explain the graph. So teacher is talking for some time. Let us start from the left end. Then teacher has thrown a question, some student has responded, and then teacher started explaining something on the board, so the graph comes down. Then again it shoots up because some student has asked a question, then the teacher has responded to that question, right. So we are somewhere here, teacher responded to the question, then again teacher started talking. Acha, okay. Okay, so teacher started talking, so we are here somewhere here, okay. Then teacher started using some projection here, then teacher threw a question at the class, okay. So we go up and so on. So this is your graph of the class. Now how can you use this graph to get an idea of the quality of teaching learning? A graph with high amplitude and frequency is an indicator of a good teaching learning process. So that is a criterion. So if your frequency and amplitude of this graph is high, that means the teaching and learning is happening better in a particular class, okay. Now it is not very difficult to appreciate why this should be so. For example, if in a class all that is happening is teacher is talking, then what you will have is just the horizontal line, you will just have this line, that is all, right. Just this line will be there. If teacher is just talking and using the chalkboard, then you may get a graph like this, something like this. So it will have a low amplitude, right, your amplitude will be just this much. Now if some student has asked a question, so he has got stimulated, right, got interested in the topic that you are teaching, and the student has got stimulated, then he or she will ask a question. It is important to note that the students do not ask a question every time they have a doubt. Please understand this point very carefully. You look into your own psychology. When have you asked questions? Whenever you are presented with a new material, you always have lot of doubts, but that does not mean you ask those doubts. You ask a doubt only when you get sufficiently interested in a topic. So please remember that a student question is an indicator of not only the presence of doubts, but it is an indicator of the level of interest in the class. Therefore if the graph touches high amplitude and students start becoming active, then it means that students have got interested, that means your teaching has been effective. That is why higher amplitude means better learning. Similarly, research has shown that if you use various teaching aids, right, not just the chalkboard, projections, multimedia and all that, then learning is better. That is why if your graph is going down deeper, right, then it is an indicator of better teaching and learning in the class. So you can actually use this graph very effectively to compare, let us say, two classrooms. For example, let us say there is a first semester course on physics being taught to, let us say, about say 500 students in about 5 classrooms with 100 students in each classroom parallelly by several teachers. Assuming that the distribution of the students in every classroom is more or less identical, distribution in terms of their performance and attitudes and so on, you can compare these various classrooms from the point of view of teaching and learning simply by plotting graphs for each of them and then looking at the graphs after the class. So, whichever classroom has higher amplitude and frequency, the graph has higher amplitude and frequency, that classroom teaching and learning has gone on better. You can use this graph also as an indicator of changes that you introduce in your teaching. Supposing you have made a change in your teaching and you want to see whether really it has been having some impact, has it improved matters for the students. You can plot a graph of your class and check this graph before you introduce the change and after you introduce the change. Sometimes in a single class you may not see the impact, therefore you can plot the graph over a longer period, maybe 2 or 3 hours, right. So, this is one way of sensing the impact of your teaching, one input for your reflection, right. This is one form of feedback. Let us look at another form of feedback. Here what we do is we distribute slips among the students. The slips may be about 1/3 the size of an A4 size page. On the one side of the slip you ask the students what they liked most about this course or the teacher. Here it is important to note that if a teacher wants to improve, simply the teacher rating is not a sufficient feedback, it does not give you sufficient inputs for improvement. Suppose a teacher knows that I am getting a feedback that is 6 on 10 and I want to improve to, let us say, 9 on 10. Now how do I improve? I know that I am 6 on 10, but how do I make myself 9 on 10? Simply the rating does not give you these inputs. So therefore it is very important to get descriptive feedback where students have to write what they felt. So this is what is being done here. That is why you will see most of this space on this slip is reserved for descriptive feedback. Now at the bottom you are asking the students rating also. So you have 2 ratings there being asked for, course rating and teacher rating. Now it is important to distinguish between these 2 ratings. Sometimes the students have some preconceived ideas about certain courses. For example, if I take electrical engineering, many students are very favorably disposed towards a topic such as digital signal processing. On the other hand, they are not favorably disposed towards some other course such as, say, semiconductor devices. So this disposition of the students is captured in the course rating. So you may have a teacher who is teaching well, but if the students have for some reason a positive disposition in one course than other course, the rating of the teacher in the 2 courses may be different, even though the teacher may be equally good in both courses. So to remove this effect of the course, we collect what is called course rating, and the teacher rating is about how the teacher is handling the course, okay. So that is really something of your interest. So both the course rating and teacher rating should be collected. So very simply said, one can say that it is difficult for a teacher to get a very high rating in a course which is not rated very highly by students. Same teacher, if he teaches a course which is rated highly by the students, then his own rating or her own rating in that course can be higher. Okay, now on the other side of the slip, you ask the students scope for improvement of this course or teacher. Now here is an important point about any feedback. A feedback does not necessarily always mean negative feedback, okay. So feedback should include both components, positive as well as negative. Even when a teacher gives feedback to the students, the teacher should give both positive and negative. It is not correct to only scold the students for their weaknesses or their lapses, okay. You must also give positive feedback. In fact, if the negative feedback is accompanied by a positive feedback, then many times the negative feedback may be received much better. Now this is what we are telling the students also, that students should be asked what they like about the course or teacher and also where the teacher or the course can be improved. Okay. Now at the bottom of this particular slip you can see there are 2 entries there. one entry says BTech/MTech and the other entry says the CGPA, that is the grade point average, cumulative grade point average of the student. Now, these are some attributes that we ask the students for. Let me spend a couple of minutes on these attributes, why they are important. If you want a faithful reflection of your impact, of the impact of your teaching, then the feedback should be collected anonymously. That is, the person who is giving the feedback should not be identified, because only then the person feels free to give his or her accurate feelings. On the other hand, there is another issue here. Supposing you have a class which is mixed. For example, there are certain classes which are interdisciplinary, where you have teachers from different disciplines. Okay? So, for instance, you can have a course on basics of electrical engineering given to all students of an engineering college, where you have students from electrical engineering background or discipline, as well as students from, let us say, metallurgy and biotechnology, civil engineering and so on. Now, it can happen that an electrical engineering student may take more interest in a course related to electrical engineering than a student from, say, biotechnology or metallurgy. Also, therefore, the problems faced by these different groups of students may be different. Therefore, unless we know that which group is, unless we are able to identify the group that is giving the feedback in a mixed class, it may be difficult for you to interpret the feedback. For example, suppose some students write that they are finding the course difficult in a mixed class. Okay? Now, if you knew the attributes of the students, for example, you knew that they are from, let us say, metallurgy department or civil engineering department. I am talking about a course in electrical engineering. Okay? I am not saying the metallurgy or the biotechnology students will always have some problems. I am saying that considering a course related to electrical engineering, okay, basics of electrical engineering being imparted to all the students. So, if you knew the attributes, then you can do something to ease the situation. Okay? You can have some separate sessions for those students who are facing the difficulty. So, that is why, in order to locate the cause of the problem correctly, we ask for some attributes. So, here, for example, in this slide, I have given BTech, MTech, because there are some courses we teach in IIT where both BTech students and MTech students are together. Okay? So, you have to see your own class composition and you can put the appropriate attributes below. Now, let me come to the CGPA, the grade point average. How this can be useful. Now, let me tell you my own experience about this. So, when I have been teaching large classes, I have got in the feedback some students saying that you are going very fast. So, let me give you some numbers. In a class of 90, say I may get about 8 to 9 students saying that you are going very fast. On the other hand, I also get in the same class a feedback saying that about another 10 students saying that you are going slow, you can speed up. Now, I used to feel that the students who are high ranking in the class, right, whose CGPA is high, may be finding that I should cover more portions and I am going slow. And there may be some students whose GPA is very low, who are repeaters. These are the students who may be feeling that I am going very fast. But I was surprised when I actually collected this feedback, okay, wherein I asked the students to give their grade point average. I found there is no correlation between the grade point average and they are saying that I am going fast or slow. In other words, I had very high ranking students saying that I am going fast, and I had very low ranking students saying that I am going slow. So, it removed my misconception that the perception of the student about the pace of the lectures depends on their performance, academic performance, right? It is not. So, you cannot just conclude ad hoc fashion. In other words, this is really important, that when you collect the feedback, we should collect it properly so that we get an accurate picture and we are not left with misconceptions about the impact of my lectures. Now here is another example of how you can use feedback for portions of your course. Okay. Now before moving on to this, some teachers may have the doubt as to, I am going back to the previous feedback on slips, where I ask the students what they like on one side and scope for improvement on the other side. What time of the course can we do this feedback session? So I suggest that this distribution of the slips, collecting feedback on the slips, can be done somewhere around 3 weeks into the course. Okay. And I encourage that this feedback be taken during the early parts of the course, so that the students will be motivated to give you feedback, because they feel that if they give you a feedback and you make corrections in your teaching, then they will be benefited in the rest of the course. So you can also collect it towards the end of the course, but then when you collect a feedback towards the end of the course, you can only implement it for the next set of students, okay, not for the same students whom you have taught. So you can collect the feedback twice in the course. I encourage you to do that. First time into the 3 weeks. So after 3 weeks of starting of the course, you collect this feedback from the students, and then you can do it again at the end of the course, and you can in fact compare the two feedbacks to see whether things have changed. Okay. Now coming to feedback on portions of your lectures. Okay. So here is an example, something that I have published in IEEE Transactional Education. All of us know that how you introduce a topic or a course makes a lot of difference to student motivation or student interest in that particular topic. So I teach a course called Semiconductor Device Modeling, and I wanted to increase the interest level of my students in the course right at the beginning. So I formulated some introduction. I really wanted to check whether the introduction that I have formulated really is making a intended impact. Has it made any difference? So what I am going to describe in the next few slides is how I went about collecting feedback on introduction. So there were two assessments, pre-lecture and post-lecture. So the introduction part spanned 2 lectures. Okay. So on the very first day when the students came, I circulated some slips. What was written on them I am going to talk to you about shortly. So I circulated the slips to the students and sought their feedback. Then after 2 hours I again recirculated a similar slip, right, to get the feedback, and the slips had some other questions also, okay, which were not there in the pre-lecture assessment. So what was the pre-lecture assessment? The pre-lecture assessment, in first part the students were asked to respond to these statements or questions. So let me go through the questions. So the first one is, students were asked to tell whether they were interested in modeling. So here I am talking about semiconductor device modeling. So they had to respond. They had 5 options. SA stands for strongly agree, A stands for agree, N stands for neutral, D stands for disagree, and SD stands for strongly disagree. So suppose a student is strongly interested in modeling, then he would tick strongly agree with this statement. On the other hand, if the student was not so much interested in modeling, he would tick either disagree or strongly disagree. If the student is ambivalent, okay, then he could, for example, tick neutral. So like this there are 4 questions here. So I know the types of models used in modern times, types of device models. If they feel that they are familiar with the types of models and they are very confident about it, then they will tick. Again they are asked to fill up this same table and they are asked to respond to these questions. Then post lecture they were also asked to write something else. So write what you felt about and learned in the introductory lecture. Your answer should be organized into points. A point should be as succinct as possible and in no case should exceed 2 lines. My feelings about the lecture are as follows. So they can write whether it was boring, it was interesting, and so on, whatever they feel about it. Then I learned the following important points in the lecture. So where they write what are the important points they learned in their own words. Okay. Now I will come to the responses, and that will throw more light on the utility of this entire feedback process. Now there are some slides here which I am not going to discuss in detail. This is only to tell you, if you are doing a scientific study, okay, of teaching and learning, then you have to specify all the conditions under which this study was carried out. So here are some of the conditions. You want to know more about this, you can go to the publication, right, which is available on the internet readily for others. So here survey conditions, for example, include the number of students. Here 21 undergraduate students in the beginning of their 6th semester. The students who have undergone a basic course on solid state devices. And another point was the grade point average of the students were distributed uniformly in the range of 6.79 to 9.23. Okay. Then there are some more information about the survey conditions. You can see these things on the slide, or you can refer to the publications. I am just flipping these slides, right, because these things are available in the publication. Then the results were tabulated or collated in some form. For example, let me tell you what this is talking about. So let us take the response to the question, I am interested in, or statement, I am interested in modeling. So how many of the students responded strongly agree, how many of them said agree, and so on, is what is collated here, and the solid part here corresponds to post lecture, and this part corresponds to pre-lecture. Okay. So this helps you to compare the impact of your lecture. Now since this part is since there is some other forms of response which are more interesting, I will skip this part as well. Those who are interested can see the publication. Let me tell you what was the descriptive response. Types of models known to me. Now very interestingly, pre-lecture the response was as follows. So students wrote the models for various devices such as diodes, MOSFETs and BJTs. 66% of the students claimed that they knew the types of models, and in the descriptive response said that by the types of models they understood the various devices whose models they were aware of, such as diodes, MOSFETs and BJTs. Clearly this was a misinterpretation of the statement. The statement is asking about types of models, which means for the same device you can have different types of models, such as analytical model, numerical model, compact model and so on. So that is what the statement was trying to find out, but 66% students misinterpreted the statement as the statement was asking the students whether they knew the models of various devices. Rather than types of models for the same device, they interpreted the statement as the types of devices for which they knew the models. So this kind of misinterpretation the students always have, right, and this is the job of the teacher to actually see that whatever he or she is trying to convey is understood exactly in the same way as is the intent. Okay. This is what is effectiveness. Now 34% students did not respond anything, right, in the pre-lecture. Now post lecture, what is interesting to see is that 14% students have continued to hold the same misconception, the models for various devices such as diodes, MOSFETs and BJTs. This is what they feel is the types of models which are known to them. Okay. So while all the remaining students got the answers right, 14% students continued to have the misconception. Therefore this feedback told me that in my introduction lecture I must do something more to clarify this misconception, that when we are talking about types of models, this should not be misunderstood as the types of devices for which the models are known. Okay. So I must spend some extra effort to make this point. So that is what this feedback says. Now let us look at one more response. Now what is interesting is that in my introduction lecture, which spanned 2 50-minute sessions, so 100 minutes, I spent about 10 to 15 minutes on talking about what is the meaning of representing a model in a normalized form. Okay, 10 to 15 minutes I spent on this topic, and I was thinking that the students would have grasped that expressing a model or representing a model in normalized form is a very important part of modeling skill. Surprisingly, no student wrote expressing the model equation in a normalized form as one of the important points that the student has learnt in the lecture. Now, this tells you that just because the teacher is spending some time or sufficient time, what we call as sufficient within course, on a topic or on a point, the students get the point. This is not really true. Okay. Now, this feedback told me that though I spent 10 to 15 minutes on this writing an equation normalized form, students really did not get the point that this is an important skill the student should have. Now, at this point I do not want to spend time on what is the meaning of writing an equation normalized form. It is nothing but there are many terms in a model equation. You have to collect the terms in such a way that the equation is written in terms of collections of terms, each collection is dimensionless. Okay. Now, that is what is meaning of writing an equation normalized form. Now, that is not so important for you to understand. The point to be made, that the point I am trying to make here is that you may be spending time on a point, okay, but hoping that the students are getting it, but many times students may not get it. So, now the question is, what is the solution to this problem? Okay. Now, the solution to this problem I realized was that before I give the introduction lecture, I must tell the students what are the important points that I am going to cover in this introductory lecture. This is what is called the concept of learning outcomes. Before the lecture, I should tell at the end of this lecture what are the important points they will learn, and then I should repeat those points at the end as a summary. What this does is it reinforces the important points the students have to learn. So, for example, in this particular case, the solution to this problem of students not understanding the importance of writing an equation normalized form is that in the beginning I should tell the students, look, in my introduction lecture you will learn about the various types of models, you will learn about writing an equation in normalized form and why it is important. So, I should tell this before the introduction lecture, like this collection of about 4 or 5 points, and then I am going to touch upon each of these 5 points, elaborate on them. Then at the end of my lecture I should again repeat that in my lecture you have learned these important points. Okay. So, this is how one can improve the effectiveness of the same lecture. So, this is how the feedback gives you ideas about how learning has happened in the students and how you can present your information, okay, in a reorganized fashion so that students learn better. You will note that stating a few learning outcomes in the beginning and at the end does not take away much of your time, right. You may have to spend maybe a couple of minutes on this at the beginning and a couple of minutes at the end. So, taking away about 4 to 5 minutes of time in 100 minutes is not much of a loss of time. Okay. So, please note that this is how in the same time we can be more effective. Now, let me come to a few more points about how to reflect. So, we have to begin with the right mental attitude. Reflection can be difficult, even threatening, because it forces us to be honest with ourselves and recognize not only our successes but areas needing improvement. Hence, openness to criticism is a must for reflection. So, I should never have the attitude that students or my colleagues or those who are giving me feedback should only talk good things about my teaching, right. So, we should welcome critical feedback, because that is what helps us to improve. Now, I said that apart from feedback, some guiding questions are also input for reflection. Now, here are some examples of guiding questions. I can ask myself, what are my assumptions about student behavior? Why and how do I do things in the class? Is my teaching effective and efficient? So, effectiveness is about how much have the students learnt, right, and efficient is about how much time I have spent in trying to make the students learn, right? Am I explaining complexity or revealing simplicity? What is my attitude, right? What is the goal of my explanation? So these are some of the guiding questions, right, about which I can ponder over, right. So for example, why and how do I do things in the class? Am I teaching to become popular among students, or am I teaching so that students learn better? You can see that these two motivations are not the same. My teaching methodology may depend a lot on answers to these questions. Okay, so there are some of the guiding questions. Let me now come to guiding thoughts. Fred Hoyle said, "It is a true nature of mankind to learn from mistakes, not from examples." This is a very profound statement. When do we learn, and how do we learn better? If you carefully analyze your own experiences, you will find that you learn best from mistakes, not from examples. Okay? Let me illustrate this. Supposing you want to learn cycling, you watch somebody do cycling. That example does not help you to learn cycling. If you want to learn cycling, you must get onto the cycle, and when you get onto the cycle, you will not be able to balance in the beginning, you will fall, so you will make mistakes, and then through those mistakes you will learn how to balance, right. Correcting through your mistakes, you will learn how to balance, how to ride. Take one more example. Now supposing you are told that, you know, if you do yoga, you will have a happy life. You may also have examples, illustrations of people who do yoga regularly and they are having a healthy and peaceful life, but just those examples do not really motivate you to do yoga always. Most of the people who do yoga start doing yoga when they face some difficulties, some diseases and so on. So this is another example where it is only through mistakes that we learn. Now if this is a fact, then how should I apply this principle in my teaching? So what this tells me is that in the classroom I must provide an environment where students feel free to commit mistakes. They feel free to express their what they have learnt, and then in the process of expression reveal their misconceptions and mistakes. Now if a teacher is very strict, if a teacher has a very serious face, an atmosphere in the class is very serious, then the students will not feel free to commit mistakes, to reveal their problems, to reveal their mistakes. And if students do not reveal their mistakes, then learning will not happen, because only through revealing the mistakes and then telling the students, you know, why they are committing the mistakes, the learning happens in the students. Another point that comes out of this guiding thought is that I must spend sufficient time in telling the students, giving a feedback to the students on their mistakes. So after a quiz or after an assignment, I must tell the students where all they have committed mistakes and why they committed the mistake. These kind of feedback sessions are very important for learning. It is not sufficient to just return the papers to the students saying they have got 60% marks or they have got 50 or 90% marks and so on. Now yet another guiding thought is by Aurobindo, a profound one. He says education is not about learning diverse subjects, it is about learning diverse ways to the same subject. Now what does it mean? An example is the following: should a maths teacher teach 10 theorems to the students, or should the teacher teach 5 theorems and 2 different proofs of each theorem? Now what this quotation seems to say is that overall the student learning will be better, okay, if they are taught 5 theorems and 2 different proofs of each theorem, rather than 10 theorems and only 1 proof for each. It is by learning different ways of doing the same thing that we develop higher thinking skills. Okay? You would have come across statements such as, you know, our education is not developing creativity, our education is not making developing the ability in students to solve practical problems in an efficient and novel manner. Now if you want to achieve this goal, then you must implement this quotation of Aurobindo, that is, we must spend our time in teaching multiple ways of doing the same thing rather than doing multiple things. Now, a question will arise, if I am going to spend my time like this, how will I cover the syllabus? Well, it is important to note for a teacher that textbook is there for every course, and everything that is there in the book or there in the syllabus need not be taught in the class. There are certain things students can learn by themselves, they are not very difficult concepts. So, the teacher can say that these things you can learn from the textbook, right, learn yourself, and if you have any doubts and so on, you can clarify. And there are certain important things which you will handle in the class, and there you will put all these ideas into practice. Okay. So, let me summarize my 1 hour session. What have we learned? So, reflection is a deliberate and structured self-critical evaluation of our assumptions and practices directed towards improvement of our teaching. So, reflection is a deliberate process. I must set aside time to do this. It is a structured process because we have talked about how we should go about doing reflection. We said we must collect feedback, and we have also discussed what is the structure of the feedback, how do I collect feedback. So, we have talked about a graphical representation of activities in the class, we have talked about slips of paper on which they can write what they liked and where is the scope for improvement, okay, and so on, right. So, that is the structure of this process of feedback and reflection. Then it is a self-critical process. In other words, I should not always feel that the feedback should tell me I am doing well. Very many times the feedback may tell me that I am not doing well, and that is good because only then I improve. Now, what are we self-critical about? We are self-critical about our assumptions and practices, okay. And finally, what is the goal of all this reflection? It is directed towards improvement of our teaching. So, at the end of reflection, it should not be that you come up with a feeling, oh, nothing can be done, right, things will never improve. These are not the kind of things that should be the end of reflection. At the end of reflection, I should always have a plan in place which has the possibility of improving matters, and I can go on repeating this, right. It is not necessary that the first time you implement a plan it will work, okay. You learn again from the mistakes, like I always give the example of the bicycle, learning how to ride a bicycle. Then we said that you can continuously improve your teaching if you go through these activities of action, feedback, reflection and planning cyclically, okay. Let me repeat the learning outcomes that we had set aside, that we had set out to achieve in the beginning of the session. At the end of this session, I hope that you are now able to recognize the important role teachers can play, recognize the need for feedback and reflection to improve teaching, and describe how to collect feedback and reflect upon our teaching. Let me leave you with this final thought of Peter Drucker. Thank you.